So today's conversation, we're coming together to talk about some of the building blocks required for growth. Specifically, we're looking at the finance and accounting function, and within that function, the role of a bookkeeper, controller, and CFO. So I was sharing a little bit ahead of this call. This is a conversation we have internally all of the time. And these community conversations are kind of a container to take these internal conversations out to the broader community and share some of the things that we frequently see coming up. Because I think it's of interest to people who are in business, entrepreneurs, growing companies. These are things that even accountants kind of split hairs between the different functions. So we're coming together, kind of opening it up, and hopefully you'll get something out of the conversation today. So we're going to dive in and introduce our panelists that will be joining us, as well as just landing a little bit and pausing for our land acknowledgement. I've shared this in a few other meetings, but we've recently refreshed our land acknowledgement to include the inclusion of Australia. We have operations in Australia, as well as our commitment to truth and reconciliation. So really weaving that in to our organization more deeply than we have before, and building it. It's included as part of our strategic plan for 2024 and beyond. So we're very glad to be here on Coast Salish territory today. So our lovely panelists who are joining us, we'll just go through. We've got Idalin McKenzie, who's calling in from Toronto, and kind of, Idalin, I'm sure you've worked in all sorts of different finance and accounting functions, but you're kind of bringing a bit of that CFO lens today. Do you want to share a little bit about your background with folks here?
Yes, certainly. So my name is Idalin McKenzie. So I currently work as a fractional CFO. I am a Tandem network member. My career span over 20 years, working across different functions within the finance realm. So I've worked in internal audit, finance day-to-day operations in controllership. I've also worked in the strategic finance area, which is where I am mostly currently. And prior to that, I worked for about 10 years in IT, digital transformation, setting up finance functions across different industries, government, energy sector, the private sector. So I do bring a broad range, I would say, of breadth and depth of the finance function and technology intersecting with the finance function.
Amazing. We're so thrilled to have you here, Idalin. Thank you.
You.
And Colin, based in Toronto. Colin, you kind of dip into bookkeeping and controllership functions and also have a pretty broad set of skills. So do you want to share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I actually have a degree in life sciences, and I switched to accounting to become a CPA in 2022. So a lot of my experiences is in the medical life sciences field with those kind of startup and the medical community. I have a full-time job at U of T, and I also have my own consulting business on the side with Tandem clients, with a medical device company and a geospatial imaging company, as well as a non-for-profit. So my background is really in kind of data analyst and analytics and data visualizations. I work with a lot of big scale budgets and kind of allocating resources, so a lot of the management accounting functions. But yeah, so I've been with Tandem since October 2022, and it's been really good to kind of have a network, a community, and it kind of allows you to kind of shift in between the different bookkeeping, controllership, and CFO roles.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I get to work with Colin, as does Christy, who's on this call, and so great to work together. Angela, did you want to introduce or kind of frame Christine?
I will. I'd be happy to. I just want to let everyone know my internet is a little unstable, so I apologize and also appreciate you just going with it. Uh, Christine is actually a dear friend of mine as well as a client, so I have the great pleasure of introducing her. And actually, we'll obviously have her introduce herself, but just acknowledging that she is a client, and so actually, Christy, maybe you can let us know how you first came to know Tandem.
Oh, yes. So I actually had the pleasure of actually knowing Tanya Lowe when we were both working on sort of different initiatives. So she was looking to grow a business. I was looking to grow a business. And after that, she transitioned into co-founding Tandem, which is how I know Tandem. So I've always sort of been aware of what a fractional CFO does, just because of that connection with her. And so in my own journey, launching my business, so I am the CEO of chrismedia.ca. I'm actually joined here today by Molly Miller, who's on the chat as well. So if you have any questions about Crisp, just feel free to shoot her a question. We've been in business since 2009, and in that time, we've been taken to all sorts of twists and turns, which I'd love to share later on about how Tandem has helped that story. Crisp is primarily in three businesses. So one is around the fractional CMO, fractional marketing services. So very much like what Tandem does. We parachute into companies' businesses, and we offer a full stack of fractional marketing resources. So we're talking about this today, bookkeeper, controller, CFO, and that would be the financial side that, Tandem does. We do this something similar, but different. We have junior marketers, senior marketers, and CMOs that we offer up to our clients. We also are really involved in the CDAP. We're an approved CDAP, Canadian Digital Adoption Program, Digital Advisor. So that actually has contributed to crazy growth for our business in the past few years. And I'm going to share about how Tandem has supported us in that journey as well. And we also, for smaller clients, offer marketing coaching services. So whether that's a course to basically take what our big offer is and make it more of a DIY offer for them, or just some clients just need a bit of an assist on their marketing and they just need to meet with somebody on a weekly, bi-weekly basis just to make sure that everything is in check. So that's what we do.
And Christine, did you do some work with Tandem as well on our side as well, or no?
Yes. So okay. So I'm just assuming you're asking me.
Did you start? Did we start as your client? Is actually what I'm curious about.
Yes, you did. So I was working on marketing on a fractional basis with Tandem for about a year. So, and we do, there's a lot of Wendy works with us.
Yes.
Like Abby
Molly worked for us.
Stole from you. There's a lot. And then in fact, Ange, you very briefly worked for me and then you went over to Tandem. There's lots of crossover happening very joyfully, I hope, at least on my side.
Yes, I think so too.
Well,
exactly. Christine let me know about this position at Tandem, actually. So I think it also speaks to the wonderful world of entrepreneurship, small business, and community, and also what can be built online. Like Christine and we obviously are in East Van, and we know, it's amazing. I find sometimes when I meet people actually in real life, and when we'd only been, I really do feel like I know them. So this kind of fractional digital world that that we're in, and being remote with clients can actually nicely still have a good connection, and I think build bonds and relationships.
Yeah, that's a beautiful segue, and it's something that I find working remotely predominantly, we've still found a way to keep it very human. So that's also the style of this conversation today. So it's not a formal presentation, very stuffy. This is open. We'll kind of pass the mic to different panelists here, and yeah, that's the beauty of it. So we'll just kind of dive in and we'll get started just talking about some of these specific functions. And Idalin, I might start with you. And if you, maybe what we can do is we can start by diving into the CFO function, and then maybe we can hand it over to Colin, and we can talk a little bit about that bookkeeping and controller function. So for those folks here in the room, do you want to describe a little bit of what a CFO does and like the value that they bring to an organization? That'd be great.
Yes, certainly. So when I think of the different roles in the finance function and the CFO in particular, I see it in terms of the focus, in terms of that lens, operational versus strategic, short-term, medium-term versus longer-term view. And I see the CFO bringing that longer-term view, that strategic view, becoming that strategic business partner to the business owner, to that executive, to the owners and operators of the business. And so the CFO is part of that team to help the owners plan for the future. The owner would have their aspirations in terms of where they want to get to. The CFO is bringing that lens to help them make that financing, operating, and investing decisions. And, it stems from, the strategy, making sure there's a robust financial strategy in place, planning the cash management. And I think there's an overlap there with the controllership and the CFO role in terms of, the treasury planning for the cash flow needs of the business to meet its ultimate goals. There's a big element also from the CFO standpoint around the infrastructure, making sure the organization has what it needs as it grows and scales the operation. And that's assessing the infrastructure of the organization. Do we have the right people at the right time? Do we have the processes in place? Do we have the financial reporting infrastructure in order to support the business as it grows and scale? So in a nutshell, really, the CFO is that strategic business partner, helping the organization to grow and supporting them along their decision making, whether it be funding, capital budgeting, or just the day-to-day operational needs.
There's one thing that I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I've found, because I've had the privilege, and I really do see it as a privilege, to have a window into so many different businesses and seeing the teams that they have in those businesses. I found that without that CFO guidance and lens, it helps companies to go further faster when they have the finance, particularly the strategic part of finance, really dialed in. I don't know if you see that as well, but I see that as a real catalyst for growth.
It is, because what I see is that the CFO becomes that strategic architect for that organization. Oftentimes, the business owner that I've had the privilege to work with, they're great in terms of knowing where they want to take the business to, that aspirational aspect, setting bold goals. But oftentimes they do need that partner to support them in implementing that, operationalizing that. What does that mean? What does that look like? In order to get here, what do I need operationally? Do I have the infrastructure I need in order to get there? What about the technology? Do I have that? Do I have the policies and procedures? Am I tuning to the risk that I need to be thinking about as I navigate the different options to growing my revenue 2 and 3 folds? What does that look like? So the CFO, in my capacity as a CFO and other CFOs, that's what we bring. We bring that lens to understanding specifically where they're going and how we can get them there, and really challenge certain thinking. Do you have enough fund? That's great, but do you have the funding you need in order to get there? Where are we going to be getting the fund? And with funding comes additional reporting requirements. Do I have the data and the reports I need in order to show the funders that I'm able to continue to meet the, the repayment of the loan, or even to receive the grant. And so that comes into the infrastructure aspect of the business itself and making sure that is in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And it almost adds a little bit more credibility. I know investors and funders, when they know you have a CFO kind of on your team, it ensures, like, it allows them to know that you're taking this seriously, that you're really understanding that the finance portion of the business needs to be looked after, and you're putting money into doing that.
Absolutely. The risk management, as I indicated, the compliance aspect, and, once you're starting to deal with external funders, the financial reporting becomes so much more important, and you'll see that transition between the bookkeeper and the controller, and really making sure that that's in place. And the CFO can play an important strategic partner in ensuring and working closely with the controller to make sure those things are put in place. And sometimes the CFO rolling up his or her sleeves in order to get some of that in place as well.
Totally. And it can be as light or as deep as you need. Like, I know we've got CFO engagements. They're just really touching base for a couple hours a month. And then we have others that want more in-depth support. So it's super scalable as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I will dip over to Colin and get your thoughts on kind of the controllership piece, maybe a little bit about, like, I think the controller role, from my perspective, seems to be the one that is the most mysterious.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we want to start there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that's the one that kind of bleeds in both ways. You have the controller kind of has to have kind of the full sight on the bookkeeping, but they also are able to pivot into kind of feed that information and design kind of cash flow projections, put together the financial reports, put together the notes, put together the tax returns. Like, there's all these kind of compliance functions that the controller tends to do. And I think that some business owners, that's kind of that border between the bookkeeper and controller. That's the one that constantly gets pushed. I think with this, there's so much tech stack out there. A lot of the bookkeeping has been automated and has been built in. It is pretty robust, but to get the information out of the systems, I'm finding you kind of need to dip more of your skill set into that controller role. You need to understand cash flow. So Idalin, you mentioned all the strategic long-term and risk management and all of that, which is completely needed. But again, I think there comes a point, say you have, you just won a seed investing round, a bunch of cash has come into the organization. At that point, the owner and the CFO are setting direction. At that point, a controller could come in, create cash flow forecasts, put in all these kind of little controls, policies, expense reimbursement policies, purchasing thresholds, kind of building out your financial policy with the board and your CFO and your owners, and then having that accessible to a bookkeeper, or even having the controller do the bookkeeper at first for that kind of helps build out that fully rounded financial cycle. Having bookkeepers do those kind of senior functions, they can kind of, there could be a gap between the bookkeeper and the CFO, whereas I find the controller that can kind of switch in between them, that is a good function to have. And it doesn't have to be there all the time. Again, there could be check-in points. For example, a board meeting that needs a special report, a controller could come and help put that together. And then the owner or manager or CFO can kind of twist that to the dashboard that they need or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in the bookkeeping function, do you want to share a little bit? I'm sure everybody feels like they know what it is, but it's probably good to just have a refresher.
So it's transaction based. So it's really getting your credit card statements, reconciling back, doing your HST returns, payroll if you have to enter people's payroll, I see that as a bookkeeping role. Where I think the difference is if it comes to some sort of policy that might be in a gray area, or you're having to kind of research a topic such as if someone's T4A or someone's a T4 employee and kind of that stuff, that's where the controller kind of dips in. But in terms of the bookkeeping, it is really transaction based. It's entering into your tech stack, it's doing the integrations, it's kind of reconciling, making all your systems are talking to each other, kind of keeping up on that technology piece. I see that as bookkeeping, but when it's starting to go into the realm of compliance, financial reporting, and you're starting to have to deal with external funders, that's kind of when you're getting more crossing into that line of senior financial roles.
I love that you've brought technology into it. It's one of the pieces that I find is probably our biggest differentiator. Small plug for Tandem. I find there's a lot of bookkeeping being done out there, but just as with so many other things, the technology is changing and evolving so quickly. And we really look for people that are really nimble and knowledgeable on the tech side, because when you can leverage that and make the bookkeeping function as efficient as possible, it allows you to then pivot and utilize those resources that might have been doing data entry, might have been doing these different things in a more strategic way. So I love that we have so many people on our team that are real techie bookkeepers. I think the other piece that's really beautiful is there's a community here that people can come back and ask questions. So to your point, Colin, when you're a bookkeeper, you're in an organization, you're faced with something that you haven't seen before, a question comes up, you're not just this sole person kind of floating out on your own. You can come back to the community and ask a question and get some insight. So I know that we're not speaking to a room of bookkeepers. I'm not, but I just think that that's such a beautiful part of this community.
Well, that's a good point too,
Yeah.
with the tech stack. Having that controller type of person come in and help you set it up is super key, because if you don't know the business and you don't know if it's set up properly, it can really cause some bookkeeping nightmares. So having maybe a senior person come in, set it up for you, and then let the bookkeeper come in, that's also a good approach as well.
For sure. I love that. I thought we'll pivot a little bit to some of the things, like this is something that I think we commonly see. So I'm just going to name it and put it out there. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the skills and competencies of those different roles. So one of the things that we see is that people will bring a bookkeeper onto their team and they just fall in love with that bookkeeper. And they're like, this bookkeeper is amazing and they can do all the things. And they kind of assume that that person can handle, I don't want to say like increasing responsibility, but can basically dip into controllership tasks, can dip into CFO tasks. That's just, it's a beautiful thing when it happens, but I think there's also some flawed thinking there. I wonder if we could talk a bit about what differentiates those roles as far as a skill set. And that could be like educational background, experience. What would differentiate people as far as skills? And maybe we'll go back to the CFO role, and Idalin, if you want to share a little bit about that.
Yes, certainly. So when I think of all three roles, I always think of them in terms of, their focus, right? And so for the bookkeeper, the focus is operational, day-to-day tactical. And you're really looking for someone that has a good, solid understanding of accounting principles and really detail-oriented, understand that, accurate, timely, complete records are critical for proper financial reporting. So you're looking for that solid skill. The bookkeeper doesn't need to have a CPA designation, but as you move up the ladder to the controller, you're looking for someone who has all the skills of the bookkeeper, but also is deeply has a deeper understanding of regulatory accounting. And so, you know, be able to identify the bookkeeper's work to see if it's properly classified according to generally accepted accounting principles. And so it's, and as your reporting gets more complex, Colin did mention that in terms of the complexity, and that the bookkeeper may not necessarily have all the skills in order to ensure the reports are being produced in accordance with GAAP. And in my experience, what I've found is that an organization just starting out, they may be on what we call the cash basis of accounting. And the bookkeeper does a very great job at that. But as increasing reporting complexity is required by investors, by other stakeholders, and there's a shift towards accrual basis of accounting, and meaning that they may be wanting IFRS reporting or ASPE reporting, it starts to become more complex and needing the controller with those kind of expertise, naturally with a CPA. From the CFO perspective, I see it as more of a strategic lens, touching a little bit on what the controller is doing, but more longer term focus skill set there. Gotta be future focused. You gotta be strategic in your thinking. Be able to work with the data and the numbers produced by the controller and the bookkeeper to tell a story about the business. It's all about the storytelling, where we're at today, where are we going, what do we need to do in order to transition from where we are to where we're going. So the skill set for the CFO has to be an astute accountant as well, but also financially focused and with, you know, great on strategy in terms of their outlook. Strong leadership, strong communication in order to tell the story about the business and to be able to, you know, share with the various stakeholders how the business is doing.
Absolutely. The other thing that comes to mind, and I'm just curious because it comes up in my COO practice, that I leverage my network a lot for my clients. So it's like, it's also like knowing who to bring in for different pieces. So I don't know if that's also something within the CFO function, but.
Yes, absolutely. So the CFO function, there's also the lens of external versus internal focus. And for the CFO, it's leveraging your network, particularly around, you know, funding, right? The business owner is looking to grow. Is there can you leverage someone in your network as a potential investor, right? Can you leverage your external contacts with banks, make the introductions in order to gain the funding for your business client? Working with auditors, right? I had a client recently where, you know, the bank stipulated that they needed audited financial statements. A CFO working with the external auditors in order to get the banks the audited financial statements. So it's certainly leveraging the external contacts in order to deliver on, you know, the various initiatives for the organization.
Yeah, I can think of one example where we went into an organization and we looked at what they were paying for audit, and we were like, this is really high, particularly with all the cleanup and everything that was done. So we were able to make a suggestion to move to a different firm. It's like, yeah, that bigger picture understanding and also connections that you can connect those founders with.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so great. Anything, Colin, that you wanted to add as we talk about kind of different skill sets in those different roles, CFO, bookkeeper, and controller?
I got all blurry.
Yeah.
I would just add that I think the difference too between a bookkeeper to controller is if you're starting to ask them to do some analysis, and I guess some signaling on your end would be maybe this person isn't up to the task, because when you start getting elevator analysis with them saying this number's going up, this one's going down, kind of, they're not really kind of adding the extra layer to that analysis for us, is it under a strategic or context or kind of on a strategy level. So that's kind of when that might be signaling. And Also onto Idalin's point of an audit, like some of those senior folks could potentially talk with the bank to say, can we just do a review, or can we just do another assurance engagement just to kind of lower that cost? So some of these things are negotiable that you wouldn't kind of necessarily know if you didn't have one of those senior folks kind of in place, or the bookkeeper just doesn't know the answer. So those types of little things I would just pay attention to as an owner, just to kind of add a little, maybe they're out of their depth.
That's so helpful, Colin. I think I'm hoping all the owner, founder, entrepreneurs on the call are taking note. Those moments when you're going to ask something of your bookkeeper, it's maybe a little bit out of scope of what they should be and are skilled at doing. So, wonderful. I think maybe Angela, I know your internet's a little bit kind of coming in and out, so we'll give it a try. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we might just move on. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how these three roles come together and kind of complement one another, I guess. So for those on the call that are new to Tandem, Angela works with us as a relationship manager, essentially matching founders, entrepreneurs, and business owners with the talent that they need. So she's often putting in individuals or teams of people into roles and companies. So yeah, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about how these roles tend to complement one another. We've touched on it a little bit. Just your perspective as a relationship manager. You've had a lot of experience adding these roles to teams.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's been really watch over my 2 years with Tandem. I have a business background, but I don't have a finance background, so it's really interesting learning as well. You know, a lot of clients come for a bookkeeper, and also just watching, acknowledging that they don't really know what bookkeeper and what to expect. How do you know if it's a good bookkeeper? And sadly, we've had clients come and say, this person stole from me, actually really behind, or I've just realized A, B, or C. And I think a bookkeeper is really like a good doctor. You don't know what they're supposed to be doing. You don't know necessarily what your books are supposed to look like. So you trust in your bookkeeper, because ultimately your bookkeeper, what the data and what the work they do then is what the controller uses, and then what the CFO. It's such an important connection, because it all builds on each one builds on the so yeah, it's been interesting to see. When I think it's usually, I think the majority is funding, all cash flow projections, they need to get some modeling, and that's when they tend to transition to a controller, and that understanding that the bookkeeper may not be able to do it. But it's also a really good thing to think about when you hire your bookkeeper, because sometimes you also have or are working on their CPA. Colin can do both. As an example, met Colin when he was thinking of coming on to Tandem, and it's super helpful because you actually know then that you have that pathway for growth. So you know that you already have that person in place, even if you don't need them yet. So I think it's an interest, like it might be a good thing to think about. Doesn't mean they have to. And if you find a really great bookkeeper, that's important too. But just a thought. And then, yeah, as they're growing again, maybe they get that funding and then they need someone to help. They probably have a CFO first if they're actually going for funding, but it just might be on a fractional level, because they do need some help to pitch deck in place and really be able to start talking to those investors. And then they need to figure out what they want to do with that money and what the goal is, and also okay, this will get us how far. So, and what is our you know some of the things look at for our runway, and how far will this money get us, and then we have to start looking again. So they work hand in hand, but it is interesting to see when and when do you know that you need to move on. Thing, you know, Christine, which is really interesting with you because you are a bit of a serial entrepreneur. And so Christine did have VancouverMom.ca, which was a really successful business, but at a different, I think, Christine, and you can correct me, but and to a different level than where you are now with Chris Media. So I will kind of come to how that journey evolved, but just looking at first, maybe you can even contrast the two, or just looking at Chris Media. What is it like now that team, now that you do have, you know, a bookkeeper, controller, and CFO, and just kind of looking at benefit of having all three working together?
Well, I mean, if I actually compare where I was at, say, 5 years ago, I want to say 4 years ago, that's when I started working with Tandem, to now, I had been muddling through my finances for the business for about, I don't know, 10 years, 9 years, thinking that I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. And so now that I have, and I can talk about that in a moment, but now that I've got, so I actually have 4 people on my Tandem team. So I've got Andrea Pember, our CFO, Hamani, our controller, Dusty is our bookkeeper. And then we're just transitioning from Caitlin to Samantha for our payroll. So it takes a village, a small army of finance people to run this company, apparently. But what I really love is one, you know, I know who to see about different things, and I can see that they have very different levels of expertise. I really love that they are a good backup to each other, even. So, you know, Hamani is just so knowledgeable and experienced. And if Andrea isn't there, she can actually back her up on many questions that I might have strategically. But also, even that, just in terms of transitions and working with Tandem on redundancy, just, you know, finding the right resources, finding the right person. But yeah, having actually this team in place, it really has been like the game changer to the growth of the business. I actually think, like, years and years ago, I had somebody say, like, you know, I was in a group and there were all of these entrepreneurs, founders, right, of these burgeoning agency style businesses. And I had shared with this team that I had just read that as a solopreneur, you should be spending at least 10% of your own time looking at your money, right? Mm-hmm. At least 10% of your time. So that, you know, assuming you're working a 40-hour work week, which as an entrepreneur, you generally are not, right? But assuming that's the case, that is a minimum of 8 hours a week, 8 hours a week that you should be looking at your money. And I shared that with the team or this group, and they were just floored. All of them were like, that is impossible. And what possibly could I be doing with all that time? Like, that's just such a waste of time, right? But if you think about it, we are like, businesses, for right or wrong, are capitalist entities, right? We are here actually to generate money and generate revenue. And what is that? That is money. That is, like, you know, so if you actually don't have that part taken care of, you're just dead in the water already. Like, you're not, that you're like it's a false start. So when I actually got really serious about that, when I had, you know, like, as you said earlier, Angela, Vancouver Mom, good business, small business, not even the level of what I'm doing right now. And when I started getting actually serious, if I look back at like a pivotal moment in my decision making, it was really about me accepting that investing in finance, every dollar I have put into it, I've gotten, like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this, I've gotten like 10 times back. I mean, that's not even a ratio I even know is true, but it feels like it's true. 20 times, I have no idea. But what my point is that I feel like every dollar I put in, it's not even just insurance that I'm putting it in the right place, but also it is the multiple you get because you know you're putting your money in the right place. So I don't know.
And I think there's also a piece that I think there's a bit of, like, seem daunting to some people to actually get into the finances and understand it, because they might feel like, oh, I don't know and I'm not going to understand. But also, maybe when you got in, there's different ways to actually do your finances. So for example, like if you want to sell vancouvermom.ca, you sometimes you want to lower your taxes, but if you're lowering your revenue, want to sell your business that has a lower value. So it really, what your goals are going to dictate also how you do your bookkeeping. Still very valid, and it's not that you're doing anything wrong, but there's a different story to tell. And I think, Idalin, that's just, and CFO and a business owner, you really, that's your job, and that's also what's so important to you, is what is the story that you're telling. And I think it's really important that you understand that. And so whether you have to go take a course, or whether bookkeeper and team that will sit down with you and take their time to explain that, so important. And it also, team know, I know what's going on, which you hope you don't have to do, but it's a really, I think, important message to send. And just, Christine, I'd love to just touch quickly on when you knew, when you started, I think, I think you started with a bookkeeper, or how you started with Tandem, when you knew that you needed that next person to come on board. Whether, and I don't know what that, yeah, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so for years I was bumbling along with a bookkeeper. I think I had gone through 3 bookkeepers, and ultimately I decided that I was just going to do my own books. I'm really, very simple business. I know how to use Xero. I can do it, right? And then I had my accountant for a long time, and I think this is a very common refrain where I really did not know that there were 2 people in between. Like there were 2 other people that should have been at the table with me talking about these things. So what came to happen was a couple things. One is I was getting really busy, and I had to really look at myself and go, I don't know how to do my books, and I'm like so behind on this, and I hate it. I hate it, right? That's the 2 things, right? And then also my business was growing. I really wanted to start hiring people to come into it. And I wanted to make sure I had enough money. And to be honest, a bit of a trigger was I had a meeting with, I was running marketing with Tandem. And I remember one of the things, when we start with marketing, we talk about personas, like who is the ideal customer? And one of the things that we were doing with Tandem was trying to figure out who is Tandem's ideal customer. And I was floored when Jacinth at the time and Tanya both said, our ideal customer is someone who actually doesn't know if they have enough money to spend and invest. They have all this money in their bank account, but they don't have any idea what to do with it, right? Because maybe a bill might come along. Should they pay? Like, should they hold it back to pay? Like, just this freezing of what to do with that money. And it dawned on me, I was like, oh, I actually want to grow. I want to do that properly. I had been in a situation where I hadn't done that effectively, and I really wanted to do it properly this time around. And, maybe it took me running marketing for Tandem, but finally I sat down and we started off first with Jacinth, who was doing like, I don't know what you would call it. You guys would all know, I'm sure, but it's basically a cash flow projection and coming up with a budget and figuring out where I wanted to be in a year and what I wanted to do there. And she paired me up with Teresa Pang at the time to do the books. Teresa was a very overqualified bookkeeper, but I think she really wanted to learn how to do the books. So I believe she was a CPA as well. So she was doing this quasi role of a controller and the bookkeeper as Jacinth came out. That went really well for a couple of years, actually, as I was growing. And then we hit to a point where I was getting to about 4 or 5 employees, and we started doing CDAPs. And CDAP last year represented like it ended up representing, I want to say, a third of our business. Like it was quite significant, this change in a very fast amount of time. At the same time, I also wanted to sell vancouvermom.ca, get that off of my plate. And actually, we transitioned from Teresa to Bhavani for that very brief time. And to be honest, even in that brief time, Bhavani added so much value around just helping me get Vancouver Mom ready to sell, And if I hadn't had her in place, so again, Bhavani was this, very overqualified bookkeeper / controller who was actually kind of preparing to be a CFO. This is why she was assigned to us. She was great. And so she actually helped me get Vancouver Mom ready to go. And then ultimately, I think you and I, Angela, we talked about how it was actually time to get more of a CFO in place. And I will say, Tanya was kind of acting like my mini CFO, like I'd go and take her for lunch and things like this. So she would do that a little bit for me on the side. So it's not like I was without any kind of strategic oversight, but I think I needed somebody a little bit more serious. And so that's when we brought in this full team as well. I should say that Caitlin was there the whole time too, doing payroll. She was doing that too. So she's been here for 3 years, I think, Caitlin. So yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's really, and the thing is too, everyone's journey is different, right? The way that what you need at what time, and but no, it's really interesting to see. And I think, that fractional CFO, right? You didn't maybe need much, but you needed some touch points. So it kind of speaks to this whole fractional world. You don't need, nor can you afford maybe a full-time CFO, but it's really great to have someone there to bounce those questions off of. Or, Christine, when you're like, should I space, like what does that look like? And I think as well, having your finances up to date to know, oh my gosh, someone wants to acquire me. That happened just recently, but they're like, I don't know. But by the time you do everything you need to do to get your books in order and to get some analysis, and person was gone, like that client was, or that possible acquisition. So yeah, and that was that.
I mean,
it's really
what I'll say about that, even now, the conversations I'm having with Andrea. So Andrea's on we have a bi-weekly leadership meeting. And so she's on that meeting every other week. So she's intimately aware with where I want to take the business. But we are having conversations just about, not necessarily about us being acquired, but how we're going to grow through acquisition, right? So, grow, maybe acquiring another agency or property acquisitions or things like this, that really it's only the CFO to have those conversations with in a meaningful way, right? So if she wasn't there, I don't even know, like, if that would be a real, like that. Now it seems like a possibility because she's there, right? And we're planning for it, or planning for some event like that to potentially happen at some point in the future.
Yeah.
So,
and actually, sorry, just a really great point. Sorry, of just having someone on your team that actually, they hopefully know what you don't know, right? Like,
Yeah.
have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And what are different ways to grow, to advise? So
yeah. And one other thing I'll say, and this is the benefit of like having a fractional person over, say, a full-time person, right? A fractional person has seen many, 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 many different businesses, presumably, like they've dipped into many, many different businesses. What's beautiful about the Tandem model too, though, in particular, because you can be a fractional CFO independently, but to do this within the Tandem network, they can tap into all of the brains that are in this network in order to support. So while she might not have the specific she's able to access that experience from the other clients she's advised, or the other, not even just her background, but the actual clients that she might be actively working with, just to share perspective. But also, again, with Tandem, being able to just tap in and ask a question about various things that the network might be seeing on our behalf. So 378 plus brains. That's
Yeah.
That's like, I feel like that's better than AI.
It's gonna give you you're less likely to get a glitchy, weird answer, a more human answer. There's so much that I want to dig into. I'm just cognizant that we have about 8 minutes left. Christine, I want to just ask you one maybe quick punchy question before we go, and then I'll also ask Christy's question to the panelists as well. Are there any roles that you wish you would have brought along sooner? Like looking back and thinking like, oh man, I waited, I slept on that too long. Yeah, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but.
Oh, well, I mean, for sure, I was like, I should have not been doing my books. It's for sure 100% true. I should not have been doing that. It worked for a bit, and then, it was fine. I actually wish I had somebody on my team that could have explained all of this to me a lot earlier. Okay, that actually is something I really wish I understood all of this a lot earlier, so that I remember meeting with another colleague, and she was trying to show me her own cash flow projections for her product business. And it was this spreadsheet, and it essentially would be what a controller would be doing, right? But in her own way, right? Like in her own way. And I just remember looking at it going, I have no time for that. I don't even know what that's for. But yet that's exactly what I needed, something like that. I needed somebody to do something like that for me. So I wish that this conversation was much more out there for somebody like me to be able to receive that. Because one other thing I'll say, maybe this isn't true for all you guys, because a lot of people here are finance people, but I think a lot of regular people have a lot of discomfort around talking about money and about what they ought to know. So to actually ask the question and then access the information, there's a bit of something going on. And I didn't actually realize that until I just happened to be in a financial, like reading financial reports kind of, I just on a whim decided to take this workshop. And then I remember going, oh, I need to put a cost of sale line here in this thing right here. There needs to be a cost. And I didn't realize that there was something between COGS and costs. I didn't know, right? Cost of goods and cost. I didn't really know. And then it dawned on me, it's like, holy crap, there's actually a lot I don't know, right? Even after 10 years of being in business, there's a lot I don't know. And so being humble about that and trying to actually then figure out, like, access people to give me that information. That's something I wish I did. Yeah.
I feel like that everybody in this room listening to this conversation has homework. You now know the difference between a CFO, controller, and bookkeeper. So I'm empowering you to go out there and spread the word to other people, other entrepreneurs, as you have conversations with folks. You have this knowledge now, so don't keep it to yourself. I just popped a program into the chat. So I think Hillary Henniger and myself, we're going to be taking the spring cohort of the Trauma of Money program. And for anybody who's like fascinated about that intersection, like just all the feelings and emotions we have around money and finance and all of that stuff, this program looks amazing, incredibly rich. So I just shared it there for anybody else who's interested. I do want to get to Christy's question because I think it is an excellent question, and I'm surprised we didn't think to include it in our list because it does come up so often. Founders, they just by nature of having to do your taxes every year, usually the first person on your finance and accounting team is your tax accountant. And often, because it's that first relationship that you forge, it's like obviously a very trusted relationship, a very important relationship, but there's a lot around kind of tax accountant versus like other accounting and finance people. And I just thought maybe Idalin and Colin could touch on that a little bit to share how that might be a different person, different advice, and maybe when have you seen it where it's been the same person wearing all the hats I just a question generally about the tax accounting and that piece.
Well, tax accounting is a very specific niche specialization of accounting. And I think the misconception is every CPA is a tax accountant. We are not. A CFO is not a tax accountant. A controller is not a tax accountant. They are different. They could be kind of, if you worked in a tax practice, I have seen them do tax work and audit work together, but in general, they're kind of a separate beast. I don't know if Idalin, you have anything on that as well.
Yes, echoing the same thing Colin just says, very different. And it requires deep specialization in taxation because there's a lot of regulation you have to keep up with, particularly specific to that tax code within that jurisdiction you're working in. And so what oftentimes I share with my clients is that know that when you have your bookkeeper internally preparing your books and preparing your financial records, the tax accountant will take those records and produce a very different report for the tax, for CRA, than they would for your bank or for yourself in terms of your financial statement. They're very different because, you know, and we can get into some of those in terms of, you know, you might, as an organization, depreciate something very differently, but then the tax code requires that same asset to be depreciated very differently. So they're two different skill set required, and they're not the same. So having a tax accountant doesn't mean you're taking care of your internal tax accounting needs.
And there's another question, just as you were talking, I've thought the term accountant as well. I think I know the answer to this, so I'm really looking for somebody to fact check me here. The only people who can use the term accountant is somebody who's gone through the CPA program and has their CPA designation. Is that true?
No, you can call yourself an accountant.
Okay. It's not like doctor and other
No.
more regulated.
You can't
Which
put the
I-
letters, you can't put the CPA and not have a CPA, or be a
Right.
candidate and say CPA candidate. You can't do that.
Okay.
But you staff accountants on banks are usually just
Yeah.
undesignated positions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's what gets very confusing. And I find that with clients when they, well, I need an accountant, but they might need a bookkeeper. But there could be someone who's an accountant that does bookkeeping, and there could be like controller work. So I think that's where it can get quite confusing on that term and what an accountant does. And
I'll
Yeah.
just add to, some accountants don't pick great bookkeepers. We know all the shortcuts. So sometimes the bookkeeper is a little more rigorous in their accounting than a CPA might be.
Right.
Totally.
Because we know where we're going.
Yes.
It's definitely a funny thing. Like, I think especially when it comes to the tech piece, like there's a lot of people, and this is, I don't want to slag the CPA program or anything like that, because I know they're getting into a certain body of knowledge, but to your point, people coming out of that program aren't necessarily amazing bookkeepers and understand the whole tech stack, understand that whole piece. I just know the bookkeepers in our network, they're so highly valued because they really have that function in hand. And so, yeah, so treasured people as part of the team. Idalin, you look like you want to jump in and maybe add
No,
more things.
I'm in total agreement. What I would add though, in terms of that accountant or that controller, what I've seen is that having the CPA designation does bring that added value, particularly when the reporting becomes more complex. There's stringent requirement to follow a generally accepted accounting principle and reporting in a specific way. And so when it comes to the bookkeeper doing their thing in terms of using the technology, that's great. But having the lens of a CPA just to ensure that the transactions are properly classified within the respective account will pay for itself.
Yeah.
Because then you do not run into any kind of compliance issue, particularly around your financial reporting.
That's so great. There's just one thing that's kind of on my mind, just as we close out. So Christine, you mentioned that, I don't know if you've said it directly, but that the Canadian Digital Adoption Grant that's been out for a while federally was such a big catalyst to your growth. And I'm just thinking of other people in the room who I will not name the businesses, but when there's these kind of regulatory changes, things coming down, and all of a sudden your business is like exploding. Yeah, it's like one of those fun roller coasters to ride, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm guessing you're kind of preparing yourself for this next phase of like what happens life after CDAP.
Yeah, because I think the program is ending end of next year, if I recall properly. So
Yeah.
that is exactly what we're prepping for. And we've needed to make some hiring decisions about how to diversify our business so that we can keep the levels that we are at, you know, when in the event that that goes away. I mean, there's other things too, just around increased competition and things like that around the program as an advisor, but absolutely having a financial team to support that growth has been critical to get us through that.
Awesome. I just have so much gratitude for everyone here taking time out of their day, one to share your wisdom, your experience, your background, and also to everybody who joined to listen in. And hopefully everybody got a little nugget, a little something out of it. And again, you are now the champion for describing CFO controllership and bookkeeping to the people in your network. So nice to see everyone, and happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, same to you.
Happy Valentine's.
Yes, and
Bye.
same, yeah.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
panel.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That was awesome. I really enjoyed that, guys.
I think we just have to stop the record button, and I don't have the power to do